Picture this. It's the morning of the biggest go-live of the year. Your team's been working on this release for months. The apps are finally deployed. The data has been painstakingly migrated. The final cutover happened at 2 a.m. And now, the morning shift's logging on. Transactions are starting to flow. Your CEO's watching. Let me ask you a question. At this moment, you feeling lucky? 10 minutes later, the first reports from the business start trickling in. The UI's gone so slow. When I click approve, the screen just hangs. By 10 a.m., you're not celebrating. You're in an emergency war room. The system's on its knees. Your team's exhausted. The high-stress, frantic hunt for root causes, hot fixes, redemption has begun. The cost of this scenario is huge. Finding and fixing performance issues in production is 10 times more expensive and 100 times more stressful than finding them during your development lifecycle. And the cost isn't just measured in developer hours. It's a massive hit to your brand. It erodes trust internally, and if your app is supporting delivery of services directly to your customers, it's going to damage your reputation in the market as well. I think you probably already can guess what I'm going to propose as the solution to all of this, but I want to challenge how you think about performance testing. Is it just a pipe dream for your team? A nice to have that always gets pushed down the backlog because there are more pressing feature tasks? Is it a years old epic that sits gathering dust somewhere at the bottom of your architecture runway? Today I want to help you reframe it. Performance testing is not a luxury. It's your go-live insurance policy. It's the only thing that takes that roulette wheel out of go-live night. My name's David Pullen. I'm Director of Architecture within Appian's Customer Success organisation. Our team works directly with some of Appian's largest, most complex, highest scale enterprise clients around the globe to ensure their technical success. Because of where we sit, we've seen it all. We've seen the good, the bad, the ugly, when it comes to launching Appian applications. In this session, we're going to cover 3 non-negotiable ingredients that you need to shift left and guarantee scalability. First, we'll cover strategy, how to stop guessing and bring structure to your performance testing projects. Second, we'll talk about technology, and specifically, why the power of Appian Locust can transform your testing approach. And third, we'll discuss authenticity, why your tests mean nothing without realistic scenarios, data, and infrastructure. And after we cover these ingredients, we'll bring it all to life. I'll share a recent case study of how we applied this exact methodology to help a large South American banking customer validate an increase in their system throughput. And then finally, I'll introduce you to the customer success performance testing as a service offering before we open the floor for Q&A. So, what's the recipe? Let's talk about the first ingredient, which is strategy. I'm going to talk about 6 key pillars that form our performance testing methodology. The first pillar of this strategy is business participation. Let's be clear. Performance testing is not just an IT exercise. In our methodology, we ensure the business team is an integral part of the project. This includes product owner and business users who are familiar with how the application is or is going to be used in real life. And that's because your tech team can't guess the business's future needs or acceptable performance thresholds. But we see this quite often. Right? Imagine what can happen when an IT team decides to run load testing in a silo. They guess concurrent user counts, they guess the transaction volumes, and they make assumptions about how the users will actually behave. And then the system passes that test with flying colours. And then go live comes along. And that complex report that you built for the finance team, the one you assumed they'd only run on a Sunday morning, starts getting used all through the day. A massive resource-heavy operation that the IT team didn't know about or didn't think to test. Suddenly the system grinds to a halt, but you did performance testing, right? So during the scenario definition phase, the business needs to have really high involvement because they've got that deep understanding of the real business operations. They're the ones providing the real world scenarios and conditions. And they're a key part of making the final decisions about the success criteria for the tests. Once a business is aligned, then we can move forward to careful planning and workload modeling. And that's really important. You can't test every single button, right? So you've got to test what matters. And we would identify scenarios based on a few key factors. So firstly, frequent operations. What's happening all the time? And maybe that's just creating, updating, assigning records. Right? And then intensive stuff. What operations are known to or expected to place higher load on the system? And maybe that's complex searches or data exports, the richest dashboards or heavy doc-gen interactions. And then what are the high-risk scenarios that would severely impact the business if they failed? And a core tenet of our methodology is that modeling an insufficient portion of your traffic will significantly reduce the predictive value of your test. So there's a balance there. There's a mindset shift to be thought about as well. If you're coming to this from a functional testing point of view, you need to rethink how you think, and it's a different approach. Functional testing is about validating end-to-end logical sequence, whereas load testing is more about decoupled independent actors operating concurrently. And that does change how you scope and how you build things. You don't need to take a use case end-to-end. You focus on the most important scenarios within those use cases. Another common mistake can be to focus too heavily on concurrent users. I could configure a load test with 10 concurrent users that results in thousands more interactions and transactions per hour than a load test with 1,000 concurrent users. The devil's in the detail, in the calibration of users to their tasks, the ratios between the tasks, the wait times between the actions. So properly scoping the personas, the actors, their tasks, and the number of each task expected in a given peak period is crucial in recreating a realistic test load. And to understand how these concurrent actors put load on the system, our methodology has us running 3 distinct progressive types of load test. So baseline test, we run this first, and the goal is not to break the system, but determine raw performance at low load. It helps functionally validate the scripts as well, and identifies any obvious immediate problem areas before we scale up. And once that baseline is established, we can run on to peak load tests to assess how the system runs at the expected peak concurrent load. So if your business stakeholders told you to expect 500 users hitting the system simultaneously during their busiest hour, then this test simulates exactly that. And finally, we want to find the system's breaking point by incrementally increasing the throughput. And the goal here is to understand, or to answer the question, when it breaks, what breaks first? How does it break? Knowing your failure point allows you to plan your scaling strategy proactively. Next, I want to talk about the test coverage maturity curve. You're not going to have 100% coverage on day one, and that's fine. Start with the features and the apps that carry the highest risk. By starting small and using the right technology, you can get something useful in just a few days. But then you need to plan to increase that coverage over time. As you all probably know, Appian apps don't operate in a vacuum. A heavy resource-intensive operation in one app can absolutely impact the performance of another app running in the same environment. So your strategy needs to mature to account for the ecosystem as a whole, scaling that load testing coverage as your Appian footprint grows. And of course, once each test has been completed, we need to analyze its impact. Our methodology requires actionable, data-driven recommendations. And it's so important, and one of the great things about properly structured and executed performance tests, you get real, trustable data insights into your apps and platforms before any damage can be done. And with the Appian platform, we have an array of performance metrics for us to use to understand how the platform and the apps running on it are performing. And it's really important to measure the impact of a load test from all angles. So, first, client metrics. These you're going to get from your load testing tool. They'll tell you any errors the virtual users hit during testing and will give you response times across the test. I like to look from the 75th percentile upwards for meaningful timings. Server metrics, right? This is pretty straightforward. This is looking at the overall CPU and RAM utilization of your underlying infrastructure. It's important, but it's not going to give you all the insights you need. So then we come on to platform level metrics. And this is where we start to get some idea of where the load is really hitting across Appian's component layers. This can include stuff like app server metrics, garbage collection, for example, engine metrics such as CPU idle time, engine mean all the time, and the other Appian components. And of course, don't forget your database, especially if it's running outside of Appian Cloud. And last but absolutely not least are the app level metrics. And these are the metrics that give you insight into application level performance. It's one thing to know, hey, opening a case takes 7 seconds at the 80th percentile. But what's the root cause of this? Analyzing Appian application level logs, for example, integration performance, sale interface performance, query performance, and so on, is a crucial piece of that puzzle. How you get and analyze this data will really depend on how you run Appian. So if you're in Appian Cloud, some of this is already available to you through My Appian. You probably recognize what you're seeing here. Beyond that, the Appian Solution Engineering team, the support team, has access to excellent tooling and real-time streamed metrics that they can look at for you. And you can also choose to configure cloud log streaming to get direct access to some of that data too. If you're self-managed, you can quite easily configure your own observability. For example, using the Appian Metrics API, it gives you this kind of stuff that you see here. And log streaming solutions, like we see on this dashboard, to have access to real-time metrics of your own. I'm not going to talk here about how you address the performance issues that you find, but there is a session straight after this with my colleague Stefan Kamger, who will be talking about a similar topic. But our methodology doesn't end there. The final step is the validation of the remediations. Once the dev team has implemented whatever recommendations came out of the analysis, the very same tests need to be rerun to definitively prove that the optimizations achieved the desired effect. And then this should obviously follow an iterative approach where remediation is not required. You might move on to the next phase. Maybe that's moving on from your baseline test onto your peak load tests and repeating the process. And where immediate remediation was required, and maybe your peak load test identified a blocking issue, then that cycle of analysis, recommendation, remediation, validation, retest is followed until your build's stable enough to proceed. And it does all take time, right? And that's why it's important not to leave performance testing too late in your delivery cycle either. So we've just seen a set of key elements or principles that form our strategy, right? There's a few pieces of the puzzle that I haven't mentioned yet. I mean, do we need somewhere to run those tests? I'll come on to that. But for the techie people in the room, and I know there's a few of you, you're probably waiting for me to talk about technology at some point. So let's put you out of your misery, and we'll do that now. So the second ingredient of this recipe is technology. And specifically, how do we actually execute these large concurrent workloads against an Appian environment? If your teams have ever tried to performance test an Appian application using standard off-the-shelf web testing tools, you'll already know some of the issues you can face. Appian's user interface is incredibly dynamic, built on the Sail architecture. The UI is stateful. Every click is an exchange of information with the server. And the underlying elements and element IDs change between executions. So if you try using traditional record and playback tools, you need to implement complex scripts that are going to patch in the actual runtime values of the dynamic IDs. It's complex, right, and time-consuming. And this is where Appian Locust comes in. Appian Locust is an open source tool built directly by our Appian engineering team on top of the very well-established performance testing tool Locust. Appian Locust is used extensively internally here at Appian. It's how we test the Appian platform ourselves. It's built for Appian by Appian. The Appian Locust tool inherently understands how Appian Sail interfaces work and how they communicate from browser to server and back. It doesn't rely on scraping brittle HTML tags. It interacts with Appian's internal APIs the exact way a real user session would do. So when you tell Appian Locust to click a button or populate a grid, it knows exactly how to negotiate that state change with the server. And because it's open source, there's no expensive licensing like you'd face with a tool like Load Runner. And our community, you guys, can even contribute to that library. The core Locust framework is extraordinarily lightweight and highly scalable. If I contrast that with a tool like JMeter, so JMeter, every virtual user you simulate requires a dedicated thread. And this leads to an overhead in memory and CPU. To run a heavy load test in JMeter, you might even need expensive servers to run that on. Locust, in comparison, is event-driven and uses asynchronous execution. This means you can simulate many hundreds of concurrent users on a single, much smaller machine, running complex tests with many steps inside. Another reason that test engineers choose Locust is because it treats performance testing as code. Right? Locust is built in Python, which provides a very low barrier for entry. Python, as you probably know, is readable, highly supported, it's ubiquitous. And because your tests are just Python scripts, they integrate perfectly with your modern development lifecycle. You can store those tests in Git, version control them, trigger them automatically from your CI/CD pipelines. Let's take a very quick look at how simple it is to interact with Appian UIs. Okay. So here we can interact with, navigate to a site with a single method. We're then clicking through into a record UI to take an action with a few more lines. And filling out that action form is easy too. And because we're just writing Python, any extra logic we might need when building our tests is really easy to add in. But we also know writing scripts from scratch can be time-consuming. And to accelerate that process, we've released the Appian Locust companion Chrome extension. So now it's even easier to build your tests. You can see in this video, you turn on the extension in Chrome, you navigate to your Appian application in the browser exactly as your business user would. And the Chrome extension automatically captures your interactions. And it turns those directly into formatted Appian Locust code. You take that code, drop it in your IDE, patch in your test data, and you're ready to run. So this is why, at this point, we're not talking about months and months to build out your tests. You really can get core scenarios built out in a few days and build incrementally from there. And then finally, we're also going to need some realistic data volumes before we run our tests. To achieve this without having a whole team of workers spending weeks manually typing in dummy data, we've got the data load generator available in the Appian app market. This has been there a while, and it allows you to rapidly create large volumes of realistic relational test data within your Appian environments. It's dead easy to configure. You point it at your database schema. It detects the structure automatically, and it's got built-in generators for common data types like users, location data, phone numbers, and it then connects directly through Appian to your database to generate and populate the data in one go. So, we've got our strategy, a formalized business-aligned roadmap. We've got our technology, Appian Locust, giving us easy-to-build scripts and highly scalable execution. But before we're done, we need to give ourselves a reality check. We need to make sure what we're doing is authentic. Here's a scene I've seen a few times. An app team is proudly showing off their successful performance test report. All the indicators are healthy, they've given the green light, and everyone's thrilled. But if you look a little bit closer, you realize their performance test was actually just a Selenium script that recreated a single user filling out a form. Or maybe this time it was a JMeter script, okay, fine. But that just loaded a single record dashboard for the exact same record instance 1,000 times. That's not performance testing in my book. It's a false sense of security. When those systems fail in production, it's because those tests lacked authenticity. We can look at authenticity across 3 specific dimensions: scenarios, data, and environments. With our strategy in place, we should already have identified the right scenarios. But when those have been translated into functioning performance test code by your implementation team, it's really easy for the authenticity of them to be lost. So, for example, first you've got a script for authentic human behavior. Scripts execute the code at the speed of light, but humans never work that fast. Humans actually read the data on their screens. They pause between tasks to answer emails. So you need to ensure you build think times and pacing into your scripts. By adding randomized pauses between steps, and you can create authentic concurrent workloads that accurately represent how users are really working. So the next time you're building that test and you're filling out a paragraph field with 5 paragraphs of lorem ipsum, just ask yourself, how long would a real user take to think all that up and type it out? Another tip, don't double up on hits to landing pages. If you load up your landing page at the start of a task, you probably don't want to load it up at the end of the task too. Your scenario probably tells you the user finally returns to the landing page to look for the next piece of work. But be mindful of this. Accidentally doubling the load on rich, complex landing pages is a quick way to put your system under more load than was planned. So they were a couple of examples of how you're accidentally putting too much load on the system. Here's the opposite. Don't run out of work. If you're testing high-volume task worker scenarios, your independent actors need enough work available in their queues to last the entire test duration. If they blast through all those tasks in 10 minutes, then your system load artificially drops to 0. To address this, you can either pre-populate enough backlog of work before the test begins, or just ensure that your other scenarios are naturally providing that work during the course of a test. And don't forget to make sure that your scripts are built to gracefully handle the scenario where no work's found. Maybe that's a valid scenario sometimes. And handling that kind of exception logic in a technology like Appian Locust is really quite easy. Testing performance with realistic user volumes, but forgetting to load the system with realistic data volumes, is a great way to rig the system and get misleading results. Your test data needs to be authentic in volume. Our golden rule is to make sure you're testing against the data volume that you'd expect 12 months after go live. It's also important that that data is authentic in shape and volume. So if you've set up one case with 10,000 child records and all the other cases just have one, then it's probably not going to give you realistic results. Equally, if the data you've generated leads all your cases to be in an open status, then again, you're unlikely to see representative query times for your main case dashboards. And don't stop just at the data in the relational database. You have to think about the entire Appian data ecosystem. And this includes making sure your synced records are correctly synced to ensure the data fabric has the realistic data volumes too. And don't forget your Appian documents. Next is the infrastructure. Your performance testing environment should be as close to production as possible, matching the topology, the configurations, the sizing. So if you've got an 8XL HA environment with 12 engine shards and 8 data fabric real-time stores, then ideally you'll be performance testing on a non-prod environment that has the same configuration, or as close as possible. Like we understand an exact replica isn't always feasible due to budget or logistical constraints, and that's understandable. Where it's not possible, matching at least the configurations and the topology if possible, so HA distributed, but with less compute, so smaller servers, would be the next best option. And that, of course, requires reducing your throughput by the same ratio as well. And environment authenticity extends beyond your Appian environment to external dependencies too. So if your process calls an external web service, that dependency needs to be responding at a realistic production speed too. If you're testing and hitting a stubbed mock service that returns a response in 2 milliseconds, but the real production service takes 4 seconds, then your results are going to be misleading. The external systems need to have representative data and realistic latency too. So when you combine a formalized strategy, the scalable technology of Appian Locust, and uncompromising authenticity in your scenarios, your data, your environments, you stop gambling. You shift from crossing your fingers on go-live night to launching with confidence. So we've broken down the recipe for performance testing success. Now we're going to have a quick look at what happens when you bring all three of these ingredients together. Recently, our customer success team led a performance testing engagement with one of the largest banks in South America. They were preparing to roll out a large-scale, document-centric workflow automation application. It was a high-stakes, highly visible modernization program, and they needed absolute confidence before deploying it to a wider user base. So in this case, they engaged Appian Customer Success for our performance testing service offering. We started with strategy. We didn't just guess what the users were going to do. We sat down with the bank's functional experts, and together we modeled the exact load for their most critical operations, focusing on complex document ingestion in this case and case working. And we made sure that our scenarios would cover downstream integrations to critical Appian AI and customer AI services that underpinned the solution and were flagged as critical high risk. Then we brought the technology. Using Appian Locust, we were able to quickly build tests needed to simulate the high volumes of concurrent users through the system. And finally, we ensured the authenticity of the tests to guarantee our results would actually mean something on go-live day. We didn't test in a standard dev environment. As part of the performance testing service offering, Appian Cloud provisioned a clone of the production environment. In this case, it was a 3-tier distributed high availability environment. And the results? The bank's target acceptance criteria was to successfully process thousands of documents an hour. And by the end of our engagement, we'd proven that the system could handle a volume 7 times greater than their current production average, which exceeded their target growth throughput requirements. Because we pushed the system to its limits with authentic data, our architects identified several key bottlenecks in the application design. We found that by making a specific subprocess more efficient, adjusting the polling cadence of some of their queues, we could drastically improve the end user experience. And when we implemented these changes and reran the tests, the results were massive. The time it took for a user to just open a task dropped by almost 70%. The speed of submitting a completed manual extraction task improved by over 60%. And without performance testing, these issues wouldn't have been identified before it was too late. And importantly, the fixes identified for them would have had to have been deployed into production with crossed fingers. Instead, the retest illustrated that the remediation had worked and with clear metrics. And there was an unexpected outcome too. Through the high demand testing, we revealed more than just the capacity in the system. We revealed an opportunity for the business operations team. We uncovered some unique task handling behaviors. The test taught the customer that operationally they had a missing piece of the puzzle. What they hadn't thought about was how their teams were going to organize work between them when they reached their target throughput. And it's this insight that's now driving the next wave of features to optimize both system and operational efficiency for them. So getting to this level of maturity doesn't have to be a multi-year journey. If you want this go-live insurance policy but don't have the capacity today to achieve it, that's exactly what our customer success performance testing service offering delivers. The CS experts, together with the very engineers that built the Appian platform, have established proven performance best practices. And we partner with you, leading the project through our methodology, applying all the strategies that I've talked about today. We've taken the Appian Locust framework I've talked about, and we've supercharged it by combining it with our internal enterprise-grade DevOps infrastructure and data analysis tools. And that gives us a huge array of real-time metrics at the click of a button. We provision the Appian cloud infrastructure to match your production setup, and we prepare realistic data ready for testing. And when you partner with us for this service, it's a completely frictionless setup. We handle the heavy lifting of provisioning the Appian Cloud Performance Test environment. We scope and build tests using Appian Locust, execute those tests using our exclusive execution platform, giving us real-time detailed data insights, and then guide your teams on ensuring data realism and deliver comprehensive reports with validated scalability metrics and detailed remediation recommendations. And because the entire methodology is built on top of the open source Appian Locust platform, there is no vendor lock-in. You own the scripts we build. You can integrate them then into your own DevOps pipelines for the future. So let's take a step back and look at what we've covered today. We started the session talking about that go-live gamble, the terrifying moment when that switch is flipped, the user traffic hits, and the roulette wheel spins. The aim of the performance testing methodology is to eliminate that gamble. We want to help your teams shift left and go from asking, are you feeling lucky, to launching with confidence. Performance testing is no longer a luxury. And with this blueprint, you now have a proven, repeatable framework to guarantee success. Just remember your 3 ingredients. First, strategy. Bring the business to the table. Don't guess their workloads. Define them, formalize them, and make sure you're modeling critical actions. Don't build your tests in an IT silo, and use data-driven insights to find your breaking points long before your users do. Technology. Leverage the power of Appian Locust. It allows you to generate high load without the overhead of expensive enterprise licenses or expensive servers. transforming your performance testing from a month-long chore into a fast, repeatable part of your delivery pipeline. And finally, authenticity. Don't give yourself a false sense of security. Make sure your scenarios reflect real human behavior, that your test data matches the volume and shape you expect well past go live, and that your environments are really representative of production. And when you bring all of these elements together, performance testing becomes your strategic advantage. So, go ahead and get Appian Locust from our open source repository on GitLab. And for documentation links and the Appian Locust Chrome companion, check out the Appian Locust listing on the app market in Appian community. And if you want to learn more about the Appian Customer Success performance testing service, then ask your account executive or any of the Appian CS team here. Thank you then. Cheers.